To rip and tear, or not to rip and tear? That is the question. Because let's be honest, we as humans love violence. You might be like, what? To me saying that and may think it's BS, but just think about it for a second. It's the truth. Our culture is absolutely filled with violence, like in movies and TV shows, in music, in video games, in books, in human history. Even religions are filled with tons of violent backstories. And that's because it's eye-catching and entertaining. It's the reason why true crime shows are so popular, and the majority of the most grossing movies of all time center around killing the bad guy to save the day. Violence is so popular that we kiddie it down so that even children can enjoy a good violent movie. It's really difficult to find a form of entertainment in our culture that doesn't have violence connected to it. In fact, let's try to think of one. Sports? No. Food? Okay, definitely not. I guess going outside, but us gamers don't really do that. Either way, you get the point. We just have to accept the fact that we generally like it, and to pretend that we don't is turning a blind eye to the obvious. But just because we like cruelty and bloodshed as a form of entertainment, does that mean we like it in real life? Well, that's where the debate really begins. And honestly, it's a very fair question. If our entertainment led to actual people getting hurt, then of course we'd want to act on it. But that's obviously a massive if. And it would take a whole lot of evidence to be able to prove that there's any kind of link between what happens on the screen and what happens in real life. Especially because there's been a long and rough history of movies and video games being accused of this, and nothing has actually happened to change it. One of the earliest examples of censorship happened in 1908, when Chicago police prevented the showing of the movie The James Boys in Missouri in public because it featured violent law-breaking. The accusations really picked up in the 1930s with gangster movies. One of the more disturbing stories is a 12-year-old returning from viewing the movie The Secret Six and going home and firing a gun into another kid's head. These movies sparked a massive debate about whether they were leading people to mimic the behavior within them. People didn't want these movies to become increasingly popular and cause even more of these instances. As the years progressed, the movies didn't get any less violent, so the debates raged on. Comic books were also put under fire in the 1950s, and successfully as well. A psychiatrist named Frederick Wertham used misrepresented information to bash comic books, claiming they were the reason for society's faults. Major regulations were put into place on comic book content, leading to a major decrease in comic sales in the 50s. Even 70 years ago, people were trying to find easy things to blame to avoid having to deal with the larger societal issues. 2 decades later in the 70s, there was a booming new form of content: video games. Yep. This meant there was a new kid on the block for people to point their fingers of blame at. A 1976 arcade game, Death Race, was harshly bashed by the media for involving running over quote-unquote gremlins with your car. I mean, just look at it. If playing this game doesn't make you want to kill someone, I don't know what will. Atari's co-founder and CEO until 1979 even said that at the time there was a rule where their games couldn't contain the harming of people out of fear that what's in the games could lead to real-life harm. Now, I actually looked up a list of some of the most brutal old-school games and was surprised by how terrible a few of them were. The first few on the list were pretty tame, like a boring looking fighting game, and then the bottom two were completely evil. I'm not going to show it because it genuinely might get my video taken down, but the number one game is called Chiller, and it's literally just torturing people for absolutely no reason. Like, we're talking about putting someone's head in an apple press level torture. It was games like these which caused concerned parents to not allow their kids to play violent games, and many parents wouldn't allow their kids to play any video games at all. The irony is that the public shaming of these games only fueled their success, which would become common for games in the future. Although this wasn't true for Chiller because they learned the hard way that you can't just make a gory game and expect it to do well, and most arcade owners just completely refused to buy it. For a while, there weren't highly recognized games which really pushed the gore standard, until 1992 with the release of the controversial Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat took inspiration from the massively popular Street Fighter, but made it less cartoonish and much bloodier. What really made Mortal Kombat as iconic as it is was its inclusion of fatalities, which allowed you to finish your opponent off in an extremely brutal way. The popularity of Mortal Kombat sparked a huge controversy I wasn't even aware of, where United States congressional hearings were held involving the discussion of violent video games in 1993 and 1994. The hearings resulted in the creation of the ESRB ratings we know of today in the US and Canada, like E for Everyone, T for Teen, and M for Mature. This M label more became a symbol of cool games rather than the games you want to stay away from. It was sort of like the parental advisory label on music, graphic, or using it became a marketing technique to make your release look cooler. Dumbing down blood and gore was looked down upon early on, as when Nintendo changed Mortal Kombat's blood into sweat, but Sega changed nothing, Sega's version sold more than 3.25 million copies while Nintendo's couldn't surpass the 1 million mark. It became clear that gore became one of the most powerful marketing techniques for video games despite the public pressure. Around the same time was the popularization of a monumental genre, first-person shooters. The game which really invented the first-person shooter genre was Wolfenstein 3D by id Software. Wolfenstein used 3D raycasting to make a 2D playing field appear 3D, allowing a first-person point of view. id Software's next game, Doom, released in 1993, took elements of Wolfenstein 3D and greatly improved upon it. Most importantly, Doom was a game of carnage, ripping apart enemies, chainsaws, and the BFG. Doom's influence furthered the genre of first-person shooters and shooters in general. The next revolutionary mature games were Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. These games were next level in their vast open worlds with the ability to do whatever you want, even crimes. Their combination of story, adventure, and gameplay made the GTA games extremely successful, which also made them an easy target, leading people to blaming the games for crimes and murders. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, famous for his non-violent roles in family-friendly movies like Terminator and True Lies, passed a law in 2005 prohibiting minors from purchasing violent games, although this law was struck down by the United States Supreme Court in 2011 for violating the Constitution. I'm not really sure of the effectiveness of this law. I'm sure a decent amount of kids with strict parents weren't allowed to own some of the games they wanted to, but I think for the most part kids would either get their parents to buy the games for them or play the games at their friend's house. Especially considering controversial video games like Call of Duty, where a large amount of the player base is children. Call of Duty even had one of the most well-known controversies in video game history in 2009 revolving around a mission where a player can kill a large number of people in an airport, but it's still one of the most successful video game series to this date. But we all know that history repeats itself, and the more people complain about these games, the better they're gonna do. For the most part, people just don't listen to people who say their hobbies are gonna make them violent. If gamers think the games are fun, they're gonna keep playing them if nothing is stopping them. But will these games ever stop? Will the people who blame video games become victorious? Let's look at the facts to find out. Well, it actually is an established fact that video games do increase aggressive behavior. One study done by the American Psychological Association, or the APA, showed that people with aggressive personalities might be more prone to increasing aggression from video games. Another study involved college students playing either Wolfenstein 3D, the violent game, or Myst, the relaxing game. After playing the games, the participants would play a competitive reaction time test where they must click faster than their opponent, and their click would send a noise to the other opponent which differed in intensity or length based on their user input. It was found that people who played Wolfenstein 3D sent longer noise blasts than those who played Myst, meaning Wolfenstein players were more aggressive. Although violent games cause aggressive behavior, doesn't necessarily mean they cause violent behavior. No. The two terms actually mean different things, and the APA makes an important distinction between them. As they put it, in psychological research, aggression is usually conceptualized as behavior that is intended to harm another. Violence can be defined as an extreme form of aggression or the intentional use of physical force or power that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in harm. The APA released a statement in 2020 saying there's not sufficient evidence to support the claim that video games cause not just aggression, but also violent acts. Now, obviously I'm no scientist or anything, but I think the increase in aggressive behavior from video games can actually be a good thing, as people can learn coping strategies to try and deal with aggression in the future. But this is something that would vary from person to person, and some may benefit from video games and some may become more aggressive from them. Additionally, according to a Polygon article, homicide and aggravated assault rates go down with video game sales spikes. This could be because people spend so much time inside trying to beat the game and don't have as much time doing crimes, or because the games provide relief to violent feelings. Either way, it's interesting data which points directly to the positive impacts of video games. Another point people point against video games is that they desensitize people to violence. This is likely true, but I still don't see how that would make someone want to do something terrible. There are millions of people who feel desensitized to graphic imagery but have absolutely no desire to go and harm someone. Chances are, if someone has the mental capacity and severe lack of empathy to do something horrible to someone, they'll already feel desensitized to violence, and video games would make no difference. It just seems incorrect to me that people wouldn't feel empathy in a real-life violent situation compared to seeing it on a computer screen. Obviously, if I see someone getting shot in a video game and feel nothing, that doesn't mean I wouldn't feel anything if someone was shot right next to me. After doing research, my opinion has not changed. It still just seems seems like people are trying to find an easy thing to blame, like in the 1950s with comic books, and ignoring the deeper issues which are significantly harder to discover and fix. I'm not going to get into what the actual issues are, both because I hate politics and because I don't know, but all in all, video games are just the scapegoat to try and ignore the real problems. That's the number of times I said violent. Well, actually now 23.